Welcome to Full Momentum and HEC-RAS podcast. I'm your host, Ben Carey. Here joining me, as always, Chris Goodell. And we have some very special guests today with a very, very interesting topic. The last couple episodes that we've recorded, Chris, have been very technical. We talked a lot about automation and using AI. We've talked about processing HDF files. So we wanted to shift gears a little bit and spend some time talking about the challenge and the exciting times that occur around when you graduate from undergrad and have to make that decision about whether you want to move into actual practice as an engineer in training or whether you go back to graduate school to get your master's degree or beyond that. And so we have a panel today of different experiences, and I've had the chance to work in a professional setting with both Esme and Rowan. And really excited to have you guys on. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And Chris, you also have an interesting perspective on this whole topic, and so I'm interested to get your thoughts too. But before we get into that, I do want to just give a chance for everybody to introduce themselves. So, Esme, do you want to go first and share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I just graduated from Gonzaga University this year with my bachelor's in civil engineering. And then this past June, I started working at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in their Walla Walla district in the H&H branch. So yeah, that's been really exciting. It's to me a big change from the academic setting, but we'll touch more on that later.
Esme, where did you grow up? Just curious.
I grew up in the Tri-Cities, so I'm in Walla Walla right now.
So you're
not too far
back
from
home country. Yeah, that's very
pretty
cool.
much. Yeah,
that's awesome. Now, Esme, did you always know that you wanted to get into kind of the water resources side of things, or is that something that came up in school? Or
no, it's definitely something that came up in school. It never really crossed my mind before going to Gonzaga. I didn't really know that was an option too much. I had no idea what anybody in water resources did. So I didn't really get into that until my first year at Gonzaga, when I took fluid mechanics and then hydraulics, and those were just some of my favorite classes. And my professor would share really interesting projects that she worked on to keep the class engaging and connect it to the class material. And there was one where kind of the first one, the one that stuck with me the most, is there was this issue where there was a giant boulder on a river, and it was a really popular kayaking route, but the boulder had kind of scoured out underneath, so there was a big cavity, and kayakers, if they got too close, would get pulled under and stuck under in the cavity. And my professor was part of a study that looked at potential solutions for that, and so that was kind of the first time where I thought I could see myself in this career, because it was not only interesting, but it's also impactful. So that's kind of how I got interested.
Are you a kayaker, Esme? or you just like to save kayakers?
I just like to save kayakers. No, I mean I've been on a kayak before, but I would not classify myself as a kayaker.
Okay.
But no, it can be fun.
And it's a great way. It's a great way to tangibly see hydraulics and how that all works, right?
Well,
absolutely.
It's interesting because I've been on a kayak before going to school at all for engineering, and then after, and it's kind of weird to definitely have a different perspective. But
yeah, I know kind of ruins rivers for you in a little bit of a way, right? You can never just enjoy the river without being like, oh, look at that eddy pattern that I see on the bank. I know what's causing that.
Well, let me sketch out the ineffective flow areas.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, my family can get a little fed up with it. But.
So what did you go to Gonzaga to study first before you decided on fluid mechanics and hydraulics ultimately?
So I originally was set on being a structural engineer.
Me too. Yeah, I think we all did that. Everybody wants to do that.
Yeah. I was super into the buildings. And then I was also interested in transportation though. So that was kind of at first. I remember meeting a classmate for the first time, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going into the structures, and she's like, oh, I'm going into water for sure. And then I didn't end up going into the structures. So
Did you
Wait,
have
see, everyone's nodding their heads. Did we all want to be structural engineers when we started? Okay, not Rowan.
Rowan's a
Okay.
purist.
All right, we'll get to you, Rowan, here in a sec.
Esme, did you have an opportunity to do any sort of internship during your schooling?
yeah, I had an internship last summer. It was a water resources internship, so that was really cool to, I guess, like I did a lot of GIS work, which I kind of was very rusty at going into my internship. So I definitely learned a lot with GIS there.
Very cool. And obviously, this is an HEC-RAS podcast, so I have to ask: have you used HEC-RAS? What's your kind of experience with the software so far in your young career?
Yes, very young career. Well, I was first introduced to RAS in a course in college where it was mostly learning the basics of 1D modeling. And then I used RAS a little bit at my internship, again, mostly 1D modeling. And then most recently for a senior design project where I worked a little bit more with 2D modeling.
Awesome. Well, again, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today, and interested to hear more about your experience and how you ended up at the core. So, Rowan, do you want to go next and introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, sure. My name is Rowan Fay. This June, I graduated from Oregon State University with degrees in ecological engineering and sustainability. This summer, I am interning again at Kleinschmidt. This is my second summer, and I am very excited to be back. In the fall, I'm going to be returning to Oregon State and finishing up a 4+1 master's degree that I started last year. And I'll be wrapping that up in the spring of 2025. So we're almost there. Yeah.
Awesome.
Wow, you are so close to being done. I bet you can feel it.
Yeah.
That's great.
Rowan, what was your story in terms of how you decided or got plugged into kind of the water resources route of engineering?
Yeah. So up until like the very, I don't know, around the time I actually started applying for college and high school, I had no interest or desire to pursue engineering. I was really interested in maybe environmental science or biology. When I was in high school, I had the opportunity to work in our school's salmon hatchery, and I loved that. And I also worked in some local county and state hatcheries. And so I was pretty convinced that I was going to go more of like a wildlife biology kind of route. But then I also got involved. Our school had a competitive robotics team in high school, and I really, really enjoyed that. And so then towards the end, I was like, oh, well, maybe there's a way I could combine these two things, my love for the environment and, fish and biology with, this engineering thing. And I originally, when I applied to school, I think, to all programs as an environmental engineer. And I feel like I didn't have a great grasp of all that would entail. And the night before my first class at Oregon State, I was reading through the course syllabus and I was like, I don't think I can spend my whole career doing this. And I put in a request, and the next day, the first day of classes, I transferred to the ecological engineering department, which I had heard was a very water-focused degree and very, there was kind of an option for river engineering restoration kind of route. And that sounded really interesting. And so that's kind of the direction that I went. I feel like I didn't really know that there was a dedicated water resources engineering field until maybe a year or two into that program. But that's kind of how I ended up in this area.
So I want to know a little bit about your high school, where you had a robotics team and your own fish hatchery.
Yes.
What in the world was going on at your high school? That's awesome.
I went to Astoria High School, Astoria, Oregon, and pretty small school. I think there's only like 600 kids. at the high school, but yeah, they really were pushing, at least when I got into high school, kind of the career prep tech kind of thing, and they had some really interesting programs. They really beefed up their FFA program around that same time as well. But yeah, Asteroid is one of, I think there's only, I could be wrong, I think there's only a handful in the state of Oregon and also in the country that have fish hatcheries on campus. So that was really fun. I spent 3 years working in the hatchery, doing, raising the fish, letting them go, all that kind of stuff. But that was a really fun program. And then the robotics club was started by a dear friend of mine as his like senior high school project. And I did it for the rest of high school because I really enjoyed it. So
that's so cool. Now, were you tempted? I know that Oregon State has a kind of a really cool niche program, and that's kind of the coastal engineering side of things. So being from the Oregon coast, were you tempted to kind of pursue that angle of civil engineering?
I never considered that. I feel like growing up in Astoria, I now have a pretty healthy respect and fear of the ocean. And I decided that I would stick with rivers. We're right at the mouth of the Columbia. I kind of found my niche there, I think.
Very cool. And what's your experience up to this point in your career with HEC-RAS been, Rowan?
Yeah, so like Esme was saying, my first taste of RAS was through coursework. I think it was my hydraulics class. We did a couple projects with it. Started with some 1D, just modeling a short reach with some culverts and some bridges through there, and then another fun project, also super challenging for my river engineering class. We did a 2D sediment transport model of the Klamath River. That was really hard, but it was also kind of like a trial by fire scenario. I learned a lot through that project. And that's kind of the point where I was like, oh, this is actually really, really fun and interesting. I could use some more HEC-RAS in my life. So yeah, then the next summer I started at Kleinschmidt, and I've gotten to work on, a handful of HEC-RAS projects here. I've also been helping with the HEC-RAS class that you guys teach, kind of working on the materials for that. That's also been a really great way to learn more about the software and the basics behind it. And then also for my senior capstone project, which I think we'll talk about here in a little bit, modeling several different alternatives for a fish passage solution over a low-head dam. And that was a really good experience because it was kind of like on our own. We had to figure, Chris helped. I did consult Chris a handful of times, but for the most part, coming up with everything ourselves.
So I think if somebody gave me in college a 2D sediment transport project, that would have been it for HEC-RAS for me. That would have been the last. So I'm happy you didn't give it up. It didn't make you run away. But I'd like to know from both of you, what was your most frustrating or maybe even challenging aspect of HEC-RAS? Esme, I'll start with you.
A great question.
Yeah, I guess. Well, it was kind of intimidating to me at first going back into it for senior design because I hadn't used it for a while, and I feel like I forgot where like most of the buttons were. So I think just getting used to the environment again, that was kind of a challenge. But we had some issues in our project with like our model going unstable. And so trying to figure those out and troubleshoot those was a pretty big challenge.
Was your capstone project was a 2D dam break model? Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a 1D 2D hybrid.
1D 2D hybrid. Okay, and it was a dam break.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, that's about as hard as it gets.
Yeah.
How about you, Rowan?
I would say probably the initial learning curve of figuring out where everything's at. Now that I have a couple years of experience, I feel like it's intuitive, but at the time it definitely wasn't. And figuring out like, okay, this button does this. This is where I add the flow data. This is where I add the terrain. Just trying to figure out all of that for the first time, and also being like constrained by the fact that this assignment was due in like 5 days and I needed to figure it out in that much time. I think that would probably be the biggest challenge.
So
I thought for sure you would bring up that. So Ben and I, Esme, Ben and I taught a class in Denver last summer, and we brought Rowan with us, and we basically said, hey, you're going to go around and help everybody who has problems, and talk about learning, trial by fire. But yeah, you did great, Rowan, and you took it like it was no big deal, and you were running around helping people. It was awesome.
Yeah,
I don't know if you
I'd say that was a challenge now that I think about it, but it was really fun. There's definitely several things that I couldn't help people with, and then I would, direct Ben and Chris to them. But the ones that I was able to help with, it was very rewarding.
Yeah. So I'll ask a follow-up question to that because I thought it was a great question, Chris. So both of you guys, when you were faced with those challenges, Esme around maybe some of the model stability and learning just kind of where that stuff are at, and Rowan, with the challenges that you noted, what did you feel like was the most helpful thing that you did to overcome that? For those individuals that are kind of getting into RAS modeling for the first time in their career and they're having these issues, what did you find was kind of the most helpful thing? Esme, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, Ben was my team's project advisor. So Ben's help on figuring out those model instability issues was really great, because once I kind of saw like the areas that you would check if you'd get an error, like where to check for certain issues to see what's wrong. Then I think that's when it starts to get more fun, is when you know a little bit about what you're doing, to where you can actually start checking things on your own and start trying to figure it out. I think that helps, just having enough knowledge to where I could start doing things on my own and kind of like building on that. I think that would be it for me.
Yeah, it's kind of like a puzzle, right? It's tough and challenging, but when you solve it, it's very rewarding, right?
Yeah. And as you solve the puzzle, you continue to solve the puzzle and put more and more pieces together, right? You just have more examples in your head that you can go back to, like, oh yeah, I remember this situation. This is what I did to fix that. But the thing about it is it's a puzzle that doesn't have a piece limit. Right? It's not a 5,000 piece puzzle. It's a never-ending puzzle.
Well, I mean, the individual model. The individual model you can solve, and that's rewarding. Yeah. But yeah, as far as like your knowledge of how to solve HEC-RAS problems, yeah, that's never ending. You'll never get to a point where you go, yep, okay, I know it all now. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, and I think there are certain areas where I could like tie it back to the theory that we learned in class, and I think that's really helpful for understanding like what your model is actually doing. And it gets harder when you're just clicking buttons and not knowing what it's actually doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because the theory just opens up your mind to what's going on behind the scenes there and leads you in the direction that you need to go to solve the problem, and really even to set up your model. And so I like that you said that, because without that, it's almost like you're playing whack-a-mole. You're just trying things to hopefully get something to work. And then if it does and you're lucky, you still don't know why it did, so you don't know how to use that on the next project. So really, really good point, Esme.
Yeah, and I feel like that's when, I don't know, maybe you can start getting more creative with it, because like it seems like you have to know how it works before you can start trying like innovative things to solve your problems.
Yeah, because certainly you can have something that looks like it's going to take a certain approach to fix the problem, but in reality, you're going to have to kind of modify that a little bit, and that's where some of that creativity comes into play. So yeah, it's great. Rowan, what about you? What did you feel like was the biggest tool that you used to kind of overcome those challenges as a relatively new RAS user?
Yeah, I feel like teaching myself kind of where to go to find information to help me with those problems. So getting really comfortable with the manuals and all of the really comprehensive documentation that HEC's put together, but then also, scouring the internet and finding resources like the, Chris's blog and the podcast. I definitely used the blog like sophomore
I did
year of
use the
college
blog
before
too,
I knew you guys. So it was kind of a fun full circle moment to join Kleinschmidt. But yeah, just like teaching myself where I can find those resources or figuring out who I can go to with my questions, I think was a big. Once I figured that out, things ended up being a lot smoother. I know my first like HEC-RAS project that I did in class, I had no idea, like, oh, okay, I have to figure out how to learn this software. Who do I go to? Where's the guidance for this? But yeah, once I figured that out, it was definitely easier.
Yeah, a plug that I just learned actually in our last podcast episode, which I thought was really cool, and this is a relevant point to share it in regards to understanding and being able to navigate the manuals. You actually can utilize AI models that are out there, like ChatGPT and others, where you can actually drop in documents, whether it's a PDF or a Word document, a manual. You can drop that into ChatGPT and then ask it to summarize a certain section or to look up certain information for you, and it has the ability to do that relatively quickly. And so for, again, relatively new RAS users that are coming out of school or starting the consulting world, that are maybe don't have the resources, Esme, that you had, or Rowan, that you were fortunate enough to have, utilizing some AI to maybe help teach yourself a little bit or just be a little bit more efficient with how you're navigating the manuals is a really cool idea. I'm interested in exploring that kind of feature more down the road.
Yeah, we just I just got, I think through LinkedIn, a guy named Blake Markson put out a HEC-RAS GPT, and you can get right on there and you just start asking questions. And I tried it out. It's actually really cool. It does a really good job of not just basically reading the entire manual for you and then telling you, giving you the answer, but you can have a conversation with it, almost like, Rowan, when you come and ask me, hey, what is it? What's the deal with these bridge piers? How do I put these in? You can literally ask it the same way and it'll respond. It's actually super cool.
Yeah. A lot of really cool opportunities out there for folks that are just getting started with the software. So thank you both for sharing some background information. And I personally have had the chance to work with both of you. So it's exciting to have you on here and exciting to give you a platform to share a little bit about yourselves, because both of you guys are superstars. Rowan, you mentioned the class. And so before we transfer over to the main topic for today, I want to plug a couple things coming up in the HEC-RAS world that Chris and I are going to be involved in. So for those of you who are not aware, we have a couple classes that are coming up this fall. There's going to be an in-person class that we're hosting in Atlanta, Georgia from September 10th to the 12th. That's a Tuesday through Thursday. And then in addition to that, on that Thursday evening after class, we're going to be hosting our annual HEC-RAS Pub and Grub in Atlanta with a bunch of professionals from the Atlanta area. So you can register online for that event. It's a low cost event. I think it's like $15 and you get a couple drinks and the opportunity to hear some really cool presentations from Chris and I, as well as some professionals there in the Atlanta area. So great opportunity to network with folks that like using hydraulic modeling. We'll be able to have some really cool conversations around automation, 2D floodway analysis, what other folks want to talk about, a lot of cool developments that are going on in the HEC-RAS world. So if you're in the greater Atlanta area, really would love to see you come out. And we'll include the link to register for that in the video description here. But if you can't find it there, go to kleinschmidtgroup.com under training opportunities, and the Pub and Grub information will be there as well. So Chris, anything to add to the Atlanta
I want to know
class?
I want to know what you're going to present on, Ben, at the Pub and Grub.
I'm keeping it secret.
Oh, okay. Whoa, we're on pins and needles here. Man.
I may be keeping it secret because I don't know, or because I have an amazing topic. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll go with that. So last time I did kind of a little deep dive on Coriolis. And I think I might do a similar type of thing, but on turbulence this time, and kind of like dig into it and really get a grasp of how it affects your model runs and things like that.
I might do a little bit of rain on grid sensitivity stuff, looking at
that'll be cool.
Looking at that, because I don't think we've had that sort of topic at this event before. So
we'll
see.
More
to come.
Ben just got back from Atlanta. And I want to know what are we getting into? How hot is it? I mean,
Well,
I know it's going to be September when we go, but still, it's hot Atlanta. So
it's hot, but the sad reality of it, Chris, and I hate to say this, but it's true. Man, Portland's hot now these days too. So I mean, it was warm, but it's not like I stepped out and was like, "What is this?" I mean, we live in the 90s here now, so it's the climate's changing. In some ways, Atlanta was actually nice because, in the evenings you get a nice cloud cover, kind of helps cool down a little bit. There was a breeze, partially because there was a hurricane off the coast of the East Coast, but it wasn't too bad. No.
Well, we still don't get the humidity like Atlanta does,
No,
at least not yet. Maybe one day.
Yeah. And then in addition to the in-person class, if you're not in the Atlanta area and you don't want to do the in-person thing, that's a more intensive 3-day class. We're also offering our 6-week, shorter intensity, longer duration 1D, 2D class from October 9th to November 13th. That's going to, again, be 6 weeks. We lecture for 4 hours every Wednesday, and then we do workshops in between. So it's the exact same curriculum that the in-person class has, just spread out a little bit more for those that can't commit 3 full days to that training. That class is filling up. I think we already have close to 40 people signed up. So if you haven't signed up yet, definitely do that sooner than later, because we'd love to have you. Anything else, Chris, on the teaching?
I'm just excited for it. It's going to be a good time, good opportunity to get on the other coast and meet some new people. So really looking forward to it.
Unfortunately, Rowan won't be walking around helping with workshops this time around. You're going to have to just deal with Chris and I. So. But great. Awesome. And then last thing before we jump into the topic today, I just want to give a shout out to our firm who's sponsoring today's episode, Kleinschmidt Associates, who are known throughout the industry as a firm that provides practical solutions to complex problems affecting energy, water, and the environment. You can learn more at kleinschmidtgroup.com. All right, let's bounce into the main topic for today. So again, we're right at the onset of school starting back up on the East Coast. I know schools are already back in session. On the West Coast, in the next month or so, folks, students are going to be going back to school. And a lot of folks, if you're going into your senior year of undergrad, have some big decisions to make about what you're going to be doing, in May or June of 2025. And there's a number of different paths that you can go. And I hope that our discussion today and the different folks that we have involved with the discussion highlight the fact that you can go a lot of different directions and ultimately come out in a really, really, really good spot. So there's certainly not a one-way road here. There's a lot of different paths that you can take. And hopefully each of us can kind of share our own thought process and how we made that decision and ultimately where we ended up. So I'll go ahead and kick us off just with a high-level overview of what everybody's done up to this point. And then we can kind of just start asking some rapid fire questions around here. So both Esme and myself, similar paths. We both went to Gonzaga, graduated after 4 years there with an undergraduate degree, and then made the decision to go into private practice on my side, and then obviously Corps of Engineers with Esme. Chris, your path was a little bit different, right? Did you go into practicing and then went to grad school after that? Is that
well,
right?
Let's not skip the most important part. I went to Oregon State University. I mean, you like how
we
Ben
do have
just
2
like
B's and 2 Zags here. I forgot. Yeah.
just glossed right over that important nugget. No, So I after graduating Oregon State, I just like Esme, I went right to work for the Corps. Only I was at the Portland district, not Walla Walla, but same division. And so I worked with a lot of people at the Walla Walla district frequently, and worked there for about 5 or 6 years, and then went to graduate school. And then came back and worked for the Corps for another 3 years or so before going to private industry.
Did you kick around getting your PhD?
I did. In fact, I not right away. Well, actually, no, I take it back. At graduate school, and be prepared for this, Rowan, but you're going to get pressure to stick around and do a PhD, I'm sure, because they all do that. But yeah, my advisor in graduate school really twisted my arm to try and keep me there to do a PhD, even to the point where he said, hey, you can do like 90% of your work at home and get it done that way. But by that time, I was like, yeah, I think I think I'm done. And already, I was already married with a kid, and it was like, okay, time to put school behind me now. But later on, I think maybe after I was out of the Corps and working in private consulting, I kind of got that itch again. I really like school, actually. I don't know what you guys think, but I enjoy if I could get paid to go to school, like a real
Same here.
wage. I think I might do that. And maybe that's how you end up being a professor. We can ask Dr. Sue about that. But I so I got the itch, and I actually applied to a program in Switzerland at ETH Zurich, and I was accepted. And then I did the finances and realized, oh, there's no way I can make this work. Because by that time I had 3 kids and a house, a mortgage, and it was just not going to work. So unfortunately, that was it. And but I think that was the right choice for me.
Cool. And then Rowan, just to recap, is doing the graduate school route right after her undergraduate, and Oregon State has a really cool 4+1 program, so there's some benefits to kind of doing things that way. So each of us have taken a little bit of a different path. This first question is more catered towards those that decided to go to grad school. So Rowan, I'll start with you with this question. When did you first think about graduate school? When did it become a real interest of yours?
Yeah, I really did not consider graduate school until maybe the end of my junior year. It wasn't really something that I wanted to do. I didn't really think about it. I feel like it felt far away at that point. But then my program announced that they were going to start doing the 4+1 program. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, if I do ever want to get a master's degree, I don't know if there would be a better time for me to do it. Still kind of be in that academic mindset. It's only 1 extra year as opposed to 2. I knew that I didn't want to stay in academia. I also love school, but I wasn't really itching to get a PhD or become a professor. And so when that option kind of presented itself, that's kind of when I was like, oh, maybe this is something I want to pursue. But yeah.
Very cool. And do you think that if, let's say that you hadn't done the 4+1 and you were looking at 2 years of school starting, this fall, do you think you still would do it?
Ooh,
I'm not
nice
sure.
stumped, Ben.
I guess it would probably have to, yeah. I guess it would have to deal with how much I enjoyed, my thesis research and everything. I feel like that would be a really big component. That's one thing I should clarify. The degree that I'm doing is a non-thesis master's. That's kind of how they make it work with the 4+1. So yeah, I'd have to say if it was really something I was passionate about in terms of the research, probably, but
yeah. And for those that are interested, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris or Rowan, but there's an MEng and an MS, right? And that's the difference, is the MEng doesn't require a thesis.
correct.
Right? And then an MS does. So
Yeah.
Rowan's getting her master's in engineering as opposed to her master's in science.
And that's what I did too.
Okay. Cool.
I went to graduate school for exactly 1 year, and no thesis. We did an individual like mini thesis thing, but no like real thesis. So, which was nice because I was working, I had a job, and so this was a way to get it finished quickly and get back to my job and be
I'll
done.
ask you the same question, Chris. If you had to sign up for 2 years and you were getting your master's in science, would you have done that?
So yeah, do you mean right when I graduated from
college? No, when you decided to go back. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I decided to go back, it was like, actually, I decided I wanted to go back about 4 years later, but it took me another 2 years to finally get funding for it. And so yeah, that is a really good question. I think you've stumped me too. I wanted to do graduate school. Would I have made it work if it was a 2-year program? I don't know. I think I think I might not have, honestly, because part of the reason it worked for me is because I was able to get funding through the Corps of Engineers, and that was a big part of me being able to go, especially at that point in my life, because
Hmm.
we had a house, a mortgage, and I was married, and it's just really hard to kind of uproot yourself without being, having that financial stability to keep going through it. And so I think if I had to guess, I'd probably say no. I probably would not have done it.
Okay. Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting clarification because really there's a whole nother side of this, right? Which is the MS side of things. And Rowan, I think your
Yeah.
point was great, which is if you're going to go the MS route, you know, hopefully you have a really, really interesting thesis topic that you're going to be spending a lot of time on, right? Because otherwise that could be
Yeah.
a real grind. I know my brother did the thesis route, and it's a lot of work. Not to say that the MEng is not, but it's just
Well,
it's kind of a different beast.
and there's another distinction that you hear a lot about, which is, if you ever want to continue on and get a PhD or even, become a professor at some point, they strongly recommend you do the MSc route instead of MEng. And almost to the point where they said, well, you can't get into a PhD with an MEng,
Hmm.
which
Sure.
I can tell you right now is not true, at least not everywhere, because I was able to get accepted to ETH Zurich, but that's in Switzerland, so it might be different there. But so it might be a factor, it might not, but definitely consider that. That
Yeah.
might put a hurdle in front of you if you ever think you might have desires to go on to do a PhD.
One follow-up round before I throw it to Esme here for a question. You mentioned obviously that you had the opportunity to intern with us between your junior and senior years. Do you feel like that internship um, uh, informed or influenced your decision to go back to graduate school, or did it not really play much of a factor?
Um, I'd say it did. I think that in talking with, some other folks in the H&H department, like Isha and Robert and Cheyenne, they all have master's degrees, and, kind of they're hearing about their experiences. I thought that maybe taking a similar path would, set me up for similar roles. But also I feel like after my summer here, I realized that I wanted to, learn more about the work that I have been doing in the form of coursework in some more specific classes. For my graduate studies, I've taken open channel flow. I'm looking forward to taking some fluvial geomorphology, sediment transport classes that were not part of my undergraduate curriculum. And so, kind of after a summer here, learning about some more of the different fields that I might be, touching on in my career. It seemed like a good path to get some more experience before coming back into the career.
Yeah, I know I didn't have the opportunity to intern at a water resources firm. I interned at a traffic engineering firm for 2 years, which was a good experience. But that's part of the reason ultimately that I made the decision that I did to go into practice is because I didn't get that opportunity to work in a firm. And so I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. And the last thing I wanted to do was spend a couple years studying something that I wasn't going to go into for practice afterwards. So that certainly influenced my decision. And it's interesting to hear how that influenced yours.
That's
Esme,
that I was going to just interrupt real quick. That is a really good point that we haven't brought up yet. It's you better make sure before you commit to that program, graduate school, that that's what you want to do, because that is a big commitment. And I have seen several folks that I know who went to graduate school right out of college, and they're doing something totally different now.
mhm.
So you got to be careful. But I think Rowan, I'm pretty sure you're a lifer in H&H, knowing you, so I'm
I
not
hope
worried
so.
about
I
you.
think so.
Cool. Esme, for you, obviously a different path, and so I'm interested in your perspective. What kind of factors went into your thought process in terms of grad school, no grad school, and ultimately, electing to move on with the Corps of Engineers?
Well, for me, I don't know, there's a couple things, but I have a tendency, like I really like learning in an academic setting. And I felt like I could easily have wanted to go to grad school for the wrong reasons, maybe, like just to continue that and because sort of like a comfort zone. Or at least that's that's what I thought. I'm like, oh, I could just stay in school forever. At least for the next couple of years.
Feels like forever though back then.
It does until it's over.
Yeah.
But I wasn't entirely sure like what I would want to focus in if I did that yet. So I just realized like how broad of a field water resources is and how many different like specialty areas there are. And even though I did have that internship and I did get exposure to different projects and things, like 12 weeks is not nearly enough to touch on everything. So I definitely not wanting to commit to something that I wasn't quite sure on yet. I think that was a big one.
So Esme, is your degree in civil engineering then?
Yeah, it's in civil engineering.
Yeah, with a special, like you specialize or you focus on hydraulics.
Well, it wasn't emphasis. There's no official specialization. It's just picking your technical electives.
Exactly. That's what I meant. Yeah. Well, so when I was at the Corps, and I think they still do this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they would do a rotation.
Yes,
where
that
you
is the
can
program
do
that I am in.
Oh, you're in that. Okay. So you move around to like, you might do a little bit in the hydraulics and then a little bit in geotech and a little bit in maybe structures and so forth.
Yeah. So that's the program that I'm doing.
Very
my
cool.
home section is the hydraulics section. So I'll be there for a while, get settled in there. And then, eventually I'll start like rotating through the different areas to learn more about those different areas. So
do you have one other? Oh, go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
Yeah. Are all the areas water resources, but just different applications of it, or are there going to be some total non-water portions?
No, they're not all water resources. Okay. Like there's a structures section, there's a geotechnical, geospatial. So like those areas, but there are also like there's the hydrology, there's like water management, and that type of thing. So you can kind of like I'll have a little bit of say in like where I go to align it with what I'm interested in and what I can bring back to the hydraulic section.
Yeah, so that's about as perfect a situation as you could have for pursuing what you were describing, right? Like not being quite sure, wanting to get more exposure to the different areas out there, going to somewhere like the Corps that does everything, right? I mean, you were mentioning the fact you were doing some restoration work. They certainly do a lot of hydraulic design. There's hydrology, there's dam safety. I mean, they have a full spectrum H&H capabilities. And so maybe that's something to take away for folks, that if you're not quite sure, and that's a reason why you're going to go into consulting and not do grad school right away, make sure you set yourself up for success and pick somewhere where you're going to have an opportunity to work on a bunch of different areas, as opposed to maybe latching on with a really, really small niche firm that only does one type of thing, because in the same, you're kind of again set yourself up for potentially not knowing all the different areas that you might be exposed to.
And
it was definitely a big draw for the Corps for me. Still being able to try things outside of water resources, but then also like a lot of opportunities within water resources and the different areas there.
Yeah, even though you're going to make a long career in water resources, I'm sure, because that's the best place to be, you are going to be very well-rounded with having that experience and doing some geotech and structural on the side and some of those other things. So is there one particular one you're going, oh, I can't wait to get there and try that out?
I kind of feel like I do kind of want to go to structures and I
just make sure you made the right choice, right?
Yeah, just to check. Pretty sure I did. Yeah. But I think it'll be interesting because I anticipate it'll be very different from the work that I'm used to. So that's kind of one. The geospatial section maybe, because I mean I really like working with GIS. So
yeah,
well, those are two.
The really cool thing about one of the things I love about my job is the fact that even if you don't go into structures or geospatial, like acquiring those skills and the knowledge there is just going to make you a better H&H engineer if that's what you end up doing, right? So there's many cross pollination skills within the civil field that there's really no bad experience, right? It's all really valuable. Chris, and you could probably speak to that same kind of experience with the Corps, right, in terms of making you the H&H engineer that you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they do a really good job with brand new young engineers. So, if you ever have the opportunity to go work at the Corps, definitely look into it. It's a great place to get started. It's a great place to make a career too, for that matter. But certainly, when you're first starting, it's definitely something you want to look into and see if you can find a spot there because, like I said, you're going to get exposure to not only a bunch of different disciplines, but some really cool infrastructure projects. I mean, really cool stuff. Have you been out to some of the dams yet, Esme?
I did. Yeah, I've been to McNary and then Ice Harbor. So I think I
Yeah,
went to McNary like my first or second week there. It was pretty cool.
some of my most jaw-dropping moments, they send me out to, I did the lower Columbia dams, John Day and the Dalles and Bonneville, but I'd get sent out there as a brand new engineer, and I'm walking on top of the spillway, or I'm down in the tail race area taking measurements, and right next to me is this 50-foot wide spillway gate that's open 10 feet, and you just got this enormous jet of water right next to you coming out. It's pretty powerful, amazing what was built there, but then to be a part of that is a lot of fun. So, yeah.
I think we should have the Corps of Engineers sponsor this episode because we're kind of
Let's try it. Yeah, let's try it.
A follow-up question for you, Esme, on that. So obviously you made the decision to go into kind of the practice route as opposed to grad school. How did you set yourself up to go straight into consulting? What sort of things did you do? What sort of things did you involve yourself in? How did you feel like you set yourself up for success with that decision?
Yeah, I think internships are really important for that. Kind of just I think like I mentioned this earlier, it's a really different environment working in an office compared to being in school, and one that I'm still getting used to, but I'm glad I had something before being at the Corps to kind of help me get used to that environment a little bit. And then just the networking and meeting people to kind of learn about like I don't know what companies they work at. Finding a good place to work. I mean, it can be hard, but it's important to find a good fit and the different projects that people work on, to trying to like figure out what your interests are and finding a spot where you can thrive in that.
Mm-hmm. How did you actually get plugged in with the Corps in terms of hearing about the job opening, interviewing? How'd that all work?
Yeah, that was through Gonzaga's engineering and computer science, like the career fair.
Excellent.
So I feel like Gonzaga does a really good job with their career fairs, at least for civils. I know there are always so many civil companies there. So yeah, like as many networking events as you can go to, yeah, go to them. Meet people.
Rowan, does Oregon State have something similar in terms of a career fair where there's a lot of local companies that are at Oregon State that students can learn about, different fields to go into and stuff?
Yeah, Oregon State has quite a few every term. I know they have like more traditional ones, and they break it down whether that be by college or department. So like the College of Engineering will have a larger one, and then kind of the smaller departments within that can kind of host their own. But OSU also is getting into doing kind of, they call it like a backwards career fair, where you can like apply to like have a booth and sit there, and then people from different companies will circle around and come talk to you, which is pretty interesting. I haven't participated in one of those, but definitely an interesting setup they got there. But they are also really good about, they also have like a career development office, at least within the College of Engineering. And there's a lot of people there who are really, focused on making sure that people have good jobs lined up and that they're preparing for their careers and stuff. Looking over resumes, cover letters, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. Not to be biased, but I feel like we're representing two of the better civil engineering schools in the Northwest. So it's cool to see, two really high achieving individuals come out of there and have so much success early on in terms of finding a job, finding grad school, finding internships. It's Oregon State and Gonzaga are definitely both doing it the right way. Chris, question for you now.
Yeah.
Thinking back to where you were at the Corps, grinding away, getting a paycheck, and then making the decision to go to grad school. When do you feel like, for those that are maybe in a similar position that have been working for a couple of years, maybe are interested in going back, when is going to grad school after starting work kind of the right move? What sort of things do people need to take into account before making that decision?
Yeah, plan it out perfectly. You have to think about some life situations too, and how that might affect things. For example, I was already married at the time. Fortunately, my wife was in a position to take a year off and go with me, but that may not have been an option, and that might not be an option for some people. And then, of course, the more life changes you make, the more difficult it is to go back. So you don't want to wait too long, and you don't want to get too far into your life before you do something like that. I think you want to look at, give yourself a couple of years if you're not sure, to make sure, hey, this is what I really want to spend a year or 2 years studying, before you pull that trigger. I waited, 4 years before I decided to do it, and then it took me a couple more years to finally get in the program. I think, probably in hindsight, I probably should have done that a little earlier even. But yeah, I mean, it's not to say you can't work. People do it all the time. They have families and they go to graduate school or even do their PhD. So you can do it. It's just a little harder. But I think the most important thing is to make sure it's the right decision for you before you make that investment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have a question for Chris, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go.
Yeah.
So how did you fit in a PE license with getting your master's degree? Like, did you do one before the other, or how did those fit together?
I actually got my PE right before I went to graduate school.
Okay.
So yeah, so I worked 4 years. Let's see. I'm going to date, you guys are going to laugh how old I am. I started in 95. I got my PE in 99 because it takes 4 years, if you don't have a master's. And then I went to graduate school later that fall. So I guess when I said 6 years, I guess it really wasn't 6 years. It was 4 years. So I don't know. My math was off. Anyway, so yeah, I got it first. But yeah, if you do have your master's or get your master's before you take your PE or apply for your PE, that counts as a year. So if it's an accredited school. So that's definitely something to think about too.
Chris, one of the things that you hear from a lot of people when they're deciding to go back or maybe deciding to do grad school right away is the worry that if you've worked for a couple of years and then you go back to school, it's going to be really hard to kind of retrain your brain on that learning side of things, especially
That's
at
definitely
master's
on my
level.
mind.
Was that a real challenge for you? If so, how did you overcome it? If not, any words of wisdom for folks that maybe are trying to overcome that hurdle, anxiety?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a challenge, but I don't think it was as bad as it could have been, because I think where I was working at the core, we were doing some pretty high level technical stuff. And that's what I went to go learn, just at another level, basically. But I would say the math side of stuff, like the really high level math, was hard for me to get back into. That took a little bit of, late nights, reading and rereading and studying to really get back into the mode of math. But everything else was pretty easy to jump back into, I think.
Yeah, I think people they say, hey, I haven't been in school for, X number of years, so it's going to be really hard to go back and, get in that environment again. And I think people undersell the amount of learning that you have to do your first few years of practice, right? I mean, there's so much learning that, Esme, I'm sure you're in it right now. Rowan, obviously you've done so much learning the last couple summers. And those sorts of skills, are very applicable to school. They're a little bit different, but they're very, very applicable. The other thing that I've heard from folks that have chosen to go back and ended up having a really positive experience is the motivation, right? Like at that point, if you're going back, you really probably are confident that that's what you want to do. And so there's not a lack of motivation. Like it's something that you're really excited to learn about. You're going to be using it. And so that's I think a big benefit. Chris, I don't know if you felt that same way when you were in school.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing too that it kind of makes me laugh a little bit, but when you're learning it in high school and even in undergrad, I'll take math as an example because that's a good one. Sometimes you think, like, when am I ever going to use that? You get into calculus, like, how is this going to actually apply? But it does. I mean, especially, I can speak from what we do at Kleinschmidt, and we're doing hydraulic modeling, and there is a level of math you have to know to understand how to do hydraulic modeling. So it is important. I wish when I took those classes, especially early on, like freshman, sophomore year, that they would give me examples of what you could do with it versus just teach you how to solve an equation. But ultimately you learn those things, and it's important for people to know that you will continue to use that even after college and grad school.
Yeah. One point I wanted to make before I throw one last question around the horn here, and that's just kind of around the idea that certain entry-level jobs require a master's degree. I think everybody who's applied for jobs, Rowan, Esme, you've all seen the ads for certain postings, and many of them have the master's required signature on there, and along with other requirements, some of which are pretty unreasonable for entry-level positions, right? And so I just want to emphasize to anybody who decides that, it's not the right time to go to grad school and just want to go into the workforce with just an undergrad degree, that don't let that master's degree required keep you from applying for jobs. It's something that, again, many firms will include on there because it's preferred, maybe even strongly preferred. But the reality is there's so many skills, particularly interpersonal skills, that firms are going to be attracted to and looking for, that if you can get an interview, which many firms will allow an interview even if you don't have a master's degree, you can find your way into positions that you didn't think you would qualify for just based on the listing. So I'm obviously an example of that. I worked at a firm that really only hired people with master's degrees. And there's a lot of other, being in a manager position now where we hire people, I can speak factually that oftentimes we'll interview people that don't meet all the qualifications because in our industry, civil engineering and particularly hydropower, there's a lot of need for engineers. And so, again, just don't undersell yourself. If you want to work somewhere, even if you don't have all the qualifications, show the things that you do bring to the table, and you can still have an opportunity to work in this industry. So.
100% agree. And I definitely don't want to undersell the benefits of getting a master's and what that does for you, but it's 100% right what you said, Ben, and don't get discouraged or don't let it make you shy away from applying. And I'll just tell you, when I'm interviewing people, the guidelines, like Ben said, or sorry, the requirements are guidelines, just like Ben said. But what I'm looking for specifically is more your passion for what we do as an industry, your passion for water resources. We can teach you what you need to know that you don't know already. And maybe you come in, from graduate school and you've got a little bit of a head start, but in a year or two, you're going to be in there in the mix with everybody else. And that decision, just as far as upward advancement and that kind of thing, is not necessarily going to be important anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. All right. Last question here before we have an opportunity for Rowan and Esme to share a little bit about what they did last year with HEC-RAS and their senior design projects. I want you guys to think back, starting freshman year of undergrad. So Esme, before we had the chance to go to Jack and Dan's, Chris and Rowan, before you had the chance to have a slice of American Dream Pizza. Okay. Think back to that first year. And if you could go back and have a conversation with that freshman, what's one thing from a career standpoint, or a learning standpoint or whatnot, that you wish you would have done, or that you would tell that freshman to strongly consider doing, that you didn't do? I'll go first just to kick it off, and then you guys can think about what you would do. So the biggest thing that I would do is tell freshman Ben that if you have a type of civil engineering that you really think that you want to pursue, it's really important to get an internship in that area, even if it's going to mean less money, less ideal location, whatever it may be. It's critical to do that because you really want to have the experience before you move into your career if you can do it. For me personally, I again worked at a transportation engineering firm. By the time I got to between my junior and my senior year, I knew I didn't want to go into that, but it was easy. The money was pretty good. I was comfortable there, and so I just decided to kind of roll it back. And ultimately, I wish I would have pursued something in water resources just to give myself a little bit more experience before I made that jump. Who wants to go next?
I'm still thinking. Rowan or Esme, you guys have to go next.
I feel like that's another one that I've been stumped again.
It can be something
That's a tough
small.
one.
Yeah.
It doesn't have
All
to be
right,
small.
I'll jump in and I'll go. So, well, I'll give you guys a little backstory for me. I desperately tried to get an internship, so it wasn't that I didn't want one, and I wanted to get one water related, and I just could not get one. There was just no opportunities, and what I ended up doing, and maybe this was me in the future talking back to me at the time,
This
was
happened.
was I went in and volunteered my time at the Corps of Engineers for 3 weeks, got my foot in the door, got to know a bunch of people, and that was between my junior and senior year. And then after my senior year, I still had one more term to go, so I wasn't ready for a full-time job yet. So I was looking for another internship. Well, lo and behold, I got one at the Corps. This time it was paid. So if you find yourself in a position that you just can't get an internship, think about that. I mean, if you can spare 3 weeks of your time or 2 weeks, search out firms that might want to take you on as a unpaid volunteer intern. I mean, the value in that is worth a ton of money. Probably worth more than I would have gotten paid with, if I had gotten an internship. So, so that wasn't quite what you were asking me, Ben, but
my takeaway is you had no regrets and your career progression.
No, definitely not. Okay, so I did think of something. So I think, if I could tell myself something, I would tell myself to seek out more the advisors in the field I was studying. I think I get from talking to all three of you that you had a great experience with your undergrad advisors. When I was at school, and I'll take the blame for this, but I just didn't reach out that much. I didn't seek out my advisor, and I didn't have much of a relationship. After college, I did. I had a great relationship with my advisor, but during college, I really didn't. And so that may have paid some dividends for maybe getting an internship or even steering me in the right direction. I ultimately think I made the right choice in where I went in, what to do for my career, but maybe even as a resource for help too. I relied more on my fellow students and didn't really take advantage of the opportunities to have a relationship with my advisor. So
that's great. That's a really, really good one, Chris.
Yeah.
Esme, Rowan, anything pop into your head?
I mean, yeah, I can go. I guess so for me it's a little bit weird just thinking back to freshman year. I went to my community college first before going to Gonzaga. So my freshman year wasn't, I guess, at Gonzaga. But thinking back to that first year before going to Gonzaga, I was trying to figure out where I wanted to transfer and what I wanted to do. And I kind of put off the decision in a way, and said, oh, well, I'll stay another year at my community college because I did running start. And I was like, well, I'll stay another year to get more prerequisites before I transfer because then I'll have a better idea. And then I didn't really have a better idea of what I wanted to do at the end of that. And I definitely got classes that I needed, but I also got a lot of classes that I didn't need. So I don't know. I probably would tell myself to just like pick something and like
take the lead
and go with it because once I did that and I did choose civil engineering and I realized like just how many opportunities there are in it. So that would probably be what I would steer my younger self towards. And then like you guys were mentioning internships, I didn't have an internship. I couldn't find an internship between my sophomore and junior year. So I probably would tell myself to try a little harder to do that. Like Chris mentioned, I wanted a water internship too, but I was limited geographically. I had to stay in the Tri-Cities at that time. So I think I was just like, oh, well, I guess it's not happening. So yeah.
Those are both great. Thanks for sharing, Esme. Rowan, what about you? Anything?
Yeah, I'd probably tell freshman Rowan to just send more like cold call emails to people. You know, freshman year, COVID in the dorms. I feel like I did my schoolwork. I had my job at the cafeteria. That was about it. I also saw, friends and stuff, but I wasn't really focused on like, oh, how can I use this time to focus on career development or just figuring out what I want to do. I feel like I was pretty narrow-minded at that point. Sophomore year, I started asking around, sending people emails. Hey, do you want to grab a coffee? I heard about your research. I'd love to learn more. And I had a lot of coffees. I met with a lot of people, and I kind of realized like, oh, these guys who are in water resources are pretty cool. I like the work they're doing. I just feel like it took I wish I had taken advantage of that sooner than I did. I feel like, I'm glad that I did that sophomore junior year, but wish that I had maybe started that earlier. I had some really interesting opportunities because of it. I worked with the OSU extension with their fish and wildlife department, and I wrote a paper about bats. They got published, so that was kind of weird and fun, awesome. And only because I kind of sent out this weird email into the ether. I got a fellowship program out at Shenandoah National Park studying brook trout for a summer that I really wouldn't have had if I hadn't, reached out to people and gotten in weird spots. Do either of those have to do with civil engineering? No, but I wouldn't have had those cool opportunities if I didn't just send people emails. So I don't know. There's no harm. Either they will get back to you and you'll get a coffee with them and you'll learn something. You might get an internship out of it, or you never hear back from them, and who cares, Yeah. But at least you tried.
I love that.
Yeah, I think the key there, Rowan, and I think the reason why you probably had as much success as you did is because you approached it through the pursuit of learning as opposed to through the pursuit of employment. Because, speaking as somebody who gets a lot of emails from random people, anytime you get a message or an email from somebody saying, hey, can you hire me? Here's my resume. Like, I ignore most of those. Most because we're not hiring, right now. But the other one is just like, well, this doesn't really seem like it's the right fit. Versus I also get messages on LinkedIn all the time from people that are just like, hey, can you talk to me more about what you guys do with HEC-RAS, or like talk to me about what you do in your career? Just am interested in learning more. I respond to 100% of those messages because it's clearly coming from a genuine point. It's an opportunity for me to help out somebody who wants to learn, and that's like an automatic thing that I want to do. And so if you are an undergraduate who's, again, we'll call it cold emailing, or LinkedIn's probably even maybe a better way to reach out to people, and just pursuing that with, hey, I'm interested in learning about what you do. Like, you mind talking to me for 15 minutes on the phone or grabbing a coffee or whatnot? I mean, that's a great way to network. And again, like Rowan, if you reached out to me and said, hey, can you talk to me about what you want to do? Even if we weren't hiring an intern and you and I sat down and talked, we probably will form a relationship. And if we do ever get to the point where we're going to hire, you're going to be the first person I think of, right? So you're setting yourself up for that employment, even if it never comes up in the conversation at all.
Yeah, I feel like one other thing to add is like reaching out to like cold emailing people is cool, but also if you're gonna do it, do like a little bit of homework ahead of time. At least know what they do. Don't just be like, oh, actually, I don't know, and then just make that like put the work on their shoulders to have to explain it to you. Like, come in with questions, know what they're actually doing and talking about, make it feel like it's not just a total waste of their time, and I feel like you'll get farther that way.
I got an email once from somebody who told me, do you know this story, Ben?
I do. You told it, but it's so good. Yeah.
Yeah. He said, I did my research on you guys. I looked at your website, and I think I am a great fit for your company. And then I looked down. Well, this was when I was working for an exclusively water resources firm. Like that's all we did. And he was a structural engineer. And I'm like, no, you didn't actually look at our website. And you could tell it was just, he was mass emailing people. And so it's fine to email out a lot. But yeah, like Rowan said, it doesn't take a long time to get on a website and just find out, hey, what does this company do? Look at their mission statement too. That's a good one too. If you can see how you fit or show them how you fit because you fit with their mission, what they're aiming to do, I think goes a long way. So, and Ben, you just let the cat out of the bag now. You're going to get so many emails, I think, from people. But
I mean, I had so much help and so much advice, from folks that were in the industry when I graduated. So that's like my promise to myself is that anytime somebody asks just to have a conversation and whatnot, I always say yes.
Well, listeners out there, just make sure you frame it correctly.
Yeah.
So right. Ben will get back to you.
Yeah. And if you went to BYU or St. Mary's, I probably won't return your messages, but don't take it personal. Cool. Well, let's wrap up the conversation with this. So obviously, again, this is a RAS podcast. We haven't talked a ton about RAS. We've got a lot of good talking points here, and I hope everybody enjoyed the episode. But I do want to spend just a few minutes with both Esme and Rowan being able to share a little bit about what their senior design project was, because both of them involved using HEC-RAS, which is unique for senior design. And I think it'd be really cool for you guys to share what you did, the general premise of what the type of HEC-RAS model that you used, and what was maybe some difficult parts that we haven't already talked about. So Rowan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, let me pull up my picture I'll share here.
Okay, cool.
Maybe I have a better one. I'll just share this one. Apologies for not having the actual model to kind of go through. Yeah, so I had a pretty interesting senior capstone, I would say. Ours was framed more as providing a second opinion to a decision that had already been made, and just kind of seeing if we came up with a similar answer or a different solution to the problem. And this is actually a core project. So Esme, maybe you know about this, or someone who does know about this. But so just to provide some context, there is a reservoir that provides drinking water to the cities of Eugene and Springfield, Oregon, called Fern Ridge Reservoir. There's a large dam there, Fern Ridge Dam, and when they built it back in the 30s, 40s, they were sending some really high velocity discharges out of that dam into the Long Tom River. And downstream, they were seeing 3 specific areas where that high velocity discharge was causing a lot of scour and erosion. And so kind of in response to that, the Corps built these 3 low head dams to dissipate that energy and slow down those flows. And it worked. It solved that problem. But the issue now was that these 3 low head dams created complete fish passage barriers going upstream. And that's several miles of spawning habitat for species like Chinook and coho salmon, cutthroat trout, Pacific lamprey. And so recently, that was kind of becoming more of a concern at this site. And the Army Corps decided that they were going to completely remove the lowest of the 3 low head dams in Monroe, Oregon. And so again, we were kind of pitched this as provide a second opinion. Your client is essentially the city of Monroe. Do your analysis, alternatives analysis, making sure that it provides fish passage, but also meets a handful of community-based criteria, like does this solution work with the city's existing water intake system? Does it continue to serve that purpose of dissipating energy from those high velocity discharges? Is it cost effective for the community? Is it something that they're going to be able to afford both upfront and continuously? And so, yeah, we decided that we were going to look at 5 alternatives of providing fish passage over that low head dam We looked at just a no action alternative kind of as a comparison. We looked at also completely removing the dam. We looked at kind of a partial dam removal, nature-like fishway situation. We also considered just updating. They had kind of a crumbling, dilapidated fish ladder that really wasn't doing its job. So updating that, or the alternative that we ended up kind of pursuing further and more or less designing was kind of a rock ramp constructed riffle situation. So in the fall term, we kind of, spent time researching. We got to actually visit the site. It's about 30 minutes south of Oregon State University. Got to take some measurements out in the field, mostly water surface elevations that we used to calibrate our existing conditions model that we kind of built our other models off of. And we really lucked out because there's a USGS gauge at that site. So it was like perfect. But yeah, so then the winter term, I primarily did most of the HEC-RAS modeling for this. It was just kind of a weird scenario of not really having the infrastructure to share it among our groups. And then also kind of, I had more experience with it. So we figured for efficiency, it might just be better if I focus on it. So we ended up modeling a handful of them, not all 5, but we did the existing conditions, the full dam removal, and the constructed riffle. And basically, we were evaluating our alternatives for velocities and depths that were in alignment with NOAA fisheries and ODF and W regulations for our species of interest, to seeing if our designs were meeting those fish passage criteria. We're also looking for, velocity, shear stress hotspots, to see if it was, providing that stability, not causing any scour or erosion, and then also making sure that it kind of still worked with the city's existing water intake. So this right here was kind of our final product of our final design. We went with this rock ramp. So if this was the dam, we decided to keep the dam in place and then just kind of build up to the crest of the dam. We also designed a low flow channel. So during those summer months when there's less flow, all the flows kind of diverted into that low flow channel, and there's still the depths and velocities needed by the fish at that point. And then during high flows, the entire structure is kind of overtopped. We also looked at incorporating large wood and boulders as kind of roughness elements to kind of get those target velocities we were looking for. And ultimately, this design kind of checked all of the boxes for us. We were able to have the depths and velocities needed for successful fish passage. We were able to, prove that this wasn't going to cause any stability issues. The water intake would still be able to work. And we also evaluated our alternatives with a 1D model for evaluating like FEMA no-rise. So yeah, that was our senior capstone project.
Very cool.
What was the cell size that you ended up using, Rowan, for the 2D model? Do you remember?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember. I know we had it was kind of, it varied because it was kind of a larger model, but I think the finest of the cells was like 10 feet, I think, and it went up to like 35, 40.
Okay.
So
So I see the drop structure there. Looks like it's an SA2D connection. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have, this is the rock riffle design.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got some rock riffles downstream of that. So flow's going from bottom to top, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So how did you model the riffles then? I see the drop structure as an SA2D connection, but how did you simulate the riffles in this 2D model?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we used terrain modifications mostly to incorporate those in, and we, refinement regions. So there were cells that were finer than 10.
Yeah, I was going to say, because otherwise you wouldn't be
yeah.
able to capture the riffle stuff, right?
Yes, the riffles were finer. They were more like 1-2 feet. But the main channel, most of that was like 10 feet. There were the finer areas over the rock ramp that were more like 1 to 2 feet. And then in the outer bank areas, it was like 30, up to like 35, 40 feet. But yeah, that's how we went about that.
And did you use diffusion wave or the full Monum set of equations?
Yeah, we used the shallow water. We used the ELM.
ELM. Good. Good.
Took a while. We spent a lot of time. I mean, we spent a lot of time on all of them, but we really worked on making sure that our first one was calibrated and worked with the shallow water equations, and then we kind of were able to build off of that one with our other models. So.
Yeah. Well, what a cool project, and a pretty advanced RAS modeling project for somebody who's in undergrad. So.
I wish I could have done that in undergrad. I didn't even know. Well, all right. Truth be told, HEC-RAS didn't exist, but I didn't even know about hydraulic models back then, let alone get to build one like this. But
what did your teammates think of RAS? Or did they? I mean, they probably didn't really get to use it very much then.
Yeah, and that was kind of a bummer with the project. I do think they wish they had more opportunity. And every week I tried to like keep them up to date. Like, oh, this is what I did this week. These are kind of the steps that I went through. But yeah, that was one of the things, just like the learning curve and the time constraints that we had. It was kind of hard to get everybody looped in on it, and sharing the model back and forth was really challenging too. We did try that at first, but it was just, that was definitely a barrier, I'd say.
And Scott Wright with River Design was your advisor, right?
Yes, he was our advisor. He was also our client. That was a lot of fun, but yeah, he was a great guy to work with. Definitely learned a lot from him. So
yeah,
couldn't ask for a better person to run to lead you guys through a project like this. I mean, that's what he's known for.
Mm-hmm. No, it was definitely a great opportunity with Scott.
Cool. Well, shouts to Scott for taking this project on, and Rowan, thanks for sharing a little bit of what you did. Esme, do you want to just share a little bit about what you did for your senior design project?
Yeah, for sure. Let me share my screen. I do have some pictures here. So my team's senior design project was a dam breach analysis for the Upriver Dam on the Spokane River. And this dam is classified as a high hazard dam. So we were tasked with looking at 9 different locations, or 9 different potential failure locations, and determining the impacts downstream if it were to break at those locations. So in this image, you can kind of see some of them here. We had these interesting mechanically stabilized earthen walls that we had to develop breach parameters for to put into our model. And we kind of the end goal is to look at the impacts downstream and to see if those results suggest that a lower hazard classification would be more appropriate, or if it would be better to stay with that higher hazard classification. So we started off developing our breach parameters, and then we had a model from a previous study. It was a 1D model on the Spokane River. It was about 50 miles, I think. So we started off with that and started making improvements and updates, updated the terrain. And then we also added a 2D area around the dam site. And I think that took a significant amount of time. And here you can see this is the dam site, a really zoomed in view of, on the left, what it was before in the original model, and then in the right, what our changes ended up being. And then, yeah, this was some of the velocity results. I think this was our sunny day conditions, one of the 3 flow scenarios that we looked at immediately around the dam site. And then profile plot from RAS with the without a breach conditions, and then the with breach conditions. You can see there's a pretty big rise.
So, Esme, what was the conclusion from the study that you guys did in terms of whether the project would likely be able to achieve less than a high hazard classification or not?
Well, our results for sort of sunny day condition showed that there would be quite a bit of rise downstream. I think it got up to 20 something feet, which is very hazardous. So there's people on the river. It was contained within the channel, but for people who were on the river at the time of that breach, it would, be like deadly. So it our results showed that it wouldn't necessarily, you couldn't just lower it to a lower hazard classification. But there were elements to this project that definitely need a more complete study, because we had some changes to our scope throughout the project, and there were elements of the project that we were able to get to that you kind of need that information to make a complete determination.
Very cool project. So as I understand it, the way you described it, it sounds like you were given a 1D model and then you turned that into a 2D or 1D 2D combined model. Is that right?
Yeah, we were given a 1D model, and then we updated some of the 1D areas. Just we had new terrain, checking for like bridge skew and things, adding in effective flow areas, and then we had high aspirations of doing 2D modeling areas in multiple locations, but we ended up doing it in one area around the dam. We prioritized that. So
I'm wondering if you had a chance or an opportunity to compare the results with the 1D original model and your updated model, and how did it change? Did it change much at all, or?
We did not compare those results, no.
Because I'd be interested to know, because you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection of upriver dam and then the river downstream of it, it's very kind of contained, right, for most of the reach. And I think you had mentioned too that it stayed in bank even with the dam failure. So it'd be cool to see like how a 1D and a 2D model compare under those scenarios.
Yeah, it would. It did stay in the banks for our sunny day conditions. So
I know one of the reasons why we didn't compare, Chris, is just because of how different the breach parameters were. The breach parameters that were developed previously were much less conservative than what FERC wanted to see at this point in the process. So it would have been kind of comparing apples to oranges.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, cool project.
Awesome.
Yeah,
well, thank you.
It was definitely a challenge, though.
And you looked at 9 different breach locations, it sounded like.
Yeah, we did. We were given those locations from the city of Spokane, and FERC had identified those locations as the ones they wanted the city to look at.
So were they a mix of concrete dams and earthen embankments, or what were some of the different structures you were breaching, and how did that affect your breach results?
there was like the spillway. There was also a fuse plug at this dam, so we looked at that one, and then the powerhouses and the mechanically stabilized earth walls, which is
those
like
are those
concrete
hexagon
those
concrete
hexagon
panels
ones that were like tied in to the earth embankment on both sides. So those were interesting.
Yeah, there's no guidance on how to breach those. You gotta get a little creative.
Yeah.
Wow, super cool. Fun projects. Like I said, I wish I could have worked on either of these 2 projects when I was in undergrad. That would have been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Esme, you guys had an opportunity to share that information with the federal agency too, right?
We did. Yeah, it was really cool. We got to meet with some engineers from FERC.
Cool.
For a meeting on our breach parameters that we developed, to kind of get their feedback, to see if there was anything that they suggested before we moved on to using those in our model, to see if they kind of met what they were looking to see.
So cool.
Nice.
Very, very cool. And for those of you who didn't already know this, of how interconnected the water resources community is, as Rowan mentioned, Fern Ridge and that project was an Army Corps of Engineers project, which is where Esme's working at now. The Upriver Dam project, the original dam breach analysis, was completed by an engineering firm that Chris and I both worked for previously. So there's just all kinds of connections. As you get in the industry, you'll find out that
I think that 1D model might have been mine.
It was.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Was it
But
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, 2D wasn't available at that point, which is why you had to do it with all the storage areas and everything else. So.
Yeah, when you showed the cross sections, I was like, oh, that looks exactly how I would have drawn those cross sections.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, FERC has made a real emphasis recently on needing 2D kind of around the dam embankments to better understand how the breach flow paths work versus I don't think, Chris, when you did that modeling, there was as much emphasis on understanding kind of the near field flow direction around.
No, you just can't do it with 1D. And so we didn't even bother trying. I mean, it was really just all about getting the water from the reservoir into the first cross section.
Yeah.
And keeping it stable.
Yeah.
A bit of a challenge.
Awesome. Well, we went long, but this was a really awesome conversation. And again, I think both of you guys showed off why I wanted you to come on the podcast, because both of you are incredible people and really excited to see where you go with your careers in the water resources world here in the Northwest. So thank you, Esme and Rowan, for making the time to join the podcast. I hope there are other engineers that are in school right now that found this video really helpful. Obviously, I already offered my own contact information. If you have questions, I'm happy to talk through some stuff. I'm sure if you're able to get a hold of Esme and Rowan on LinkedIn or other ways, that they would be willing to answer some questions that you all might have too. And even if you are done with school or not interested in going back, hopefully some of the project discussion at the end of the video here you found interesting and informative. And again, shouts to Gonzaga, shouts to Oregon State for having such awesome undergraduate programs that put students in the position to do that kind of work. So that's great.
I got one more question for both of you. Rowan, am I going to see you at an Oregon State football game? And Esme, is Ben going to see you at a Gonzaga basketball game this year?
It's a lot easier to get tickets to an Oregon State game than it is a Gonzaga game.
Well, that's true. I guess it's not really fair, but Rowan, I will see you there, I'm sure.
Yes. I'm planning on going to several, so.
I gotta fly to New York to go watch Gonzaga, so that's what I'm gonna be doing. Well, awesome. Well, thanks again, everybody, for taking the time. This has been Full Momentum and HEC-RAS podcast. Until next time.